I'm David Knowles, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, we discuss the latest updates from Ukraine, analyse a leaked video of what appears to be the Wagner group recruiting convicts in a Russian penal colony. And we're on the ground in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, ahead of the first meeting between Russian President Vladimir Putin and Chinese President Xi Jinping since before the invasion of Ukraine.
We
are facing a very serious crisis in energy caused by Putin's war in Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
Every weekday afternoon, we sit down with leading reporters from the Telegraph's London newsroom and our teams reporting on the ground to bring you the latest news and analysis on the war in Ukraine. It's Thursday, the 15th of September, day 204. And today, I'm joined by Associate Editor Tom Nichols and our Russia correspondent, Natalia Vasilyeva, calling in from Uzbekistan, where she's reporting on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's 2022 summit in Samarkand. I started by asking Dom for the latest news from Ukraine.
Hi, Dave. Hi, everybody. We still haven't got an accurate picture of quite what consolidation is happening in the north, although we do know that Ukraine is pushing in other military units and other elements of state authority, police and what have you, to hold on to the gains that they made over last weekend. Elsewhere, down sort of more into the south, nearer Kherson, the town of Kryvyi, and again I apologise for my mispronunciation, which is sort of north of Kherson, about maybe 100 k's north of Kherson. President Vladimir Zelensky's hometown. That was hit by 8 cruise missiles, and more specifically, the dam in that town was hit by 8 cruise missiles, which caused a huge amount of flooding. The river swelled to about an extra 2.5 meters, which I think the latest estimates are over 100 homes were flooded, and we are told that the waters there are receding, and there's no immediate threat to life. However, I mean that's a major piece of infrastructure that's been hit there. I mean, I can't see any military significance to it. It's not as if there's any military base downstream or any reason to hit that other than just to, as we saw in the immediate response to last weekend's lightning strikes in the north, we see Russia just hitting back at critical national infrastructure. Just after the weekend, they hit power stations. Now they're hitting a dam and possibly or seemingly attempting to flood the city, which has, as I say, symbolic value. It's President Zelensky's hometown, but no military significance. I mean, I'm no international lawyer on this, but quite how far you get to the edge of it being a war crime if you're targeting elements of the nation that is critical to life and limb for civilians. I mean, that in itself that is a war crime, but I don't know quite where this would stand. But it's ridiculous. It doesn't have any military effect. All it does do is it underlines what we've thought for many weeks now, that Russia has, and there's an inability to push back. All they can do is chuck missiles around at civilian areas and terrorize the population. That is what is happening here, what they're attempting to do here. So we'll keep an eye on that. We'll see what if the water levels do rise again, and whether any more of the city has been flooded there. But that seems to be the only military response so far to Ukraine's lightning strike last weekend.
Dom, can I quickly ask you to comment on, you wrote a thing for The Telegraph about some footage that we've seen from the battle for the Kharkiv region, footage from a gunner's body camera. You wrote a little bit about it. Could you tell us what we saw and what it tells us about the Ukrainian advance?
Yeah, so this was really interesting. This is footage. We're not quite sure the vehicle. It might be a US-supplied Humvee, but we're not entirely sure. It's taken from body cam. It's going onto a position, and the individual filming is firing a heavy machine gun. Not sure exactly of what caliber. And this was supposedly part of last weekend's push in the northeast. And so the piece we wrote, I wrote with Roland Oliphant. We were talking about what tactics we saw, and as you said yesterday and a couple of days this week, we think that what Ukraine tried to do, or did do very effectively, was bypass areas of heavy Russian defence, mark and avoid, basically mark areas and leave that for follow-on forces, either artillery or heavy tanks, to deal with, but get as far and as fast as possible. So this was, as we think, was largely wheeled-based, so Humvees, Australian Bushmaster, even Toyota 4x4s we've seen images of. And their tactics seems to be to race ahead, very lightly armoured, so that we think they may have had anti-tank teams on board and heavy machine guns, but actually they're not able to put up with serious opposition. So we think they would if they came into contact, they'd sort of scoot around and bypass and move on. And this is very interesting. So this is a bit of a hybrid of Western and Soviet/Russian doctrine. So in the West, we generally don't aim to fight for information. Our reconnaissance units try and do it by stealth, so they sneak around and they sort of use optics and other electronic surveillance methods of carrying out reconnaissance. So we aim not to get into the contact battle. So we use lighter vehicles that still pack a punch, but they are not designed to have a major punch up with a T-72, for example. And nor are they are so far ahead of forces, these sort of what we call formation reconnaissance. They'd be so far ahead of the wider force that they've got no great immediate backup. So we don't fight, or we don't seek information that way. We try to sneak around, and it is possible to sneak around even in an armored vehicle. You can move if you've got a good competent crew. You can apply intelligence to the battlefield, and you can use the ground in a smart manner and sneak around that way. Soviet and Russian doctrine, by contrast, is very happy to fight for information. So they would have their BMP armoured or infantry fighting vehicles up the front. They would also have tanks with them, at least a tank in a grouping of 3 or 4 BMPs that would then go looking for information. And they look for information. They're quite happy to get into a fight. If you get into a fight, then the enemy, or whoever you're fighting, reveals the weapons they've got and their dispositions and so on and so forth. So the Russians are generally happy to fight for information, whereas we don't. So what Ukraine did last weekend was a bit of a mashup of the two, a bit of a kind of hybrid. As we've seen great innovation from the Ukrainian forces over the last few months, that seems exactly what they did last weekend. So use very lightly armoured vehicles, very fast vehicles. And of course, an armoured vehicle is generally a trade-off between 3 things. It's firepower, protection, and mobility. So you can have as protected a vehicle as you like, but you're never going to move very far. You can have an enormous gun, but again, you need a very big vehicle to put up with the shock of that kind of firepower. So it doesn't lend itself to small, nippy little things. Or you could be small, light, and very fast. But if you do that, you haven't got a great big gun and you haven't got a lot of armour. So always a trade-off. Now, what Ukraine seemed to have done last weekend was go hell for leather on the mobility side. So very lightly armoured, very lightly protected, but great mobility. So very fast, great cost-crunchy capability, and very nippy and mobile. But they were still prepared to fight for information. So they would go forward, get into a punch-up, and then bypass where possible. And we think they were only dismounting these anti-tank teams where they absolutely had to. So it was a really interesting way of showing what can be done on the modern battlefield, a sort of hybrid of this, but using light vehicles which are primarily designed for stealth, because they can't really put up with much punishment coming back their way, but also being prepared to get into harm's way and see what's out there, and then run away as quickly as you can when the enemy reveal what they've got. So it was very interesting to see them adopt these tactics last weekend. It had great effect. Now, of course, on the flip side, Russia, as we've said many, many times, suffers from poor morale, lack of training in many respects. We think they've largely burnt through their Premier League fighters, so they're on to those of much lower military experience. We don't think they are very well supported in terms of looking after their people, food, medics, and so on and so forth, or looking after their vehicles, so the serviceability is probably quite poor. So this new, I'm not suggesting this Ukrainian tactic of light vehicles rushing headlong at the enemy should be rolled out for every single scenario. It was appropriate for the time and place that it was used, but that in itself, using the right tools for the right job at the right time, is operational art. That is where the bosses earn their stars, literally. I mean, they should think about this. It's the intelligent application of all the information available to them, and they decide where and when to mass forces and in what sort of what mix of light and heavy forces and so on and so forth. So it was very good direction of the war, I would suggest. Not appropriate for every single scenario, but in this case it seems to be when you break through that Russian crust, then there was very little behind it, and what little there was could be marked, bypassed and avoided as they continue their push up to the Oskil River.
Thank you very much for that, Dom. Just one more update, I think, to talk about before we move to Natalia, who's in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. And I don't know, Natalia, if you want to come in on this as well. But Dom, would you just start us off? Evgeny Prigozhin is back in the news. There's been an extraordinary, we think, a leaked footage of Mr. Prigozhin offering the chance to fight in Ukraine for Russia to hundreds of prisoners in a penal colony. Can you tell us what we saw and what it might tell us about Russia's armed forces?
Yevgeny Prigozhin is rumoured to be the head of the Russian Wagner group, the mercenary group. He's always denied it. He's known as Putin's chef because he's got a sort of food and restaurant empire. That's how he came to know Putin in the first place. He knew Putin from St. Petersburg, where Prigozhin had a number of outlets, and got to know Putin there, and now has some very lucrative contracts with the Kremlin. So he's known as Putin's chef, supposedly the financier and director of the Wagner group. He's always denied that. However, here we go. Here's this footage comes out of him addressing a group of people, saying, "Come and join the Wagner group. This is what you can do. This is where we fight. This is what's happening in Ukraine. Come and work for us," which is completely at odds with every other utterance that we've had from him and from Russia about his position and the Wagner group and so on and so forth. It speaks of Russia maybe trying to get around this need for increased personnel, so not going for general mobilization, but seeking to use mercenary groups and seeking to recruit to those mercenary groups from prisons and elsewhere. None of this will count as sort of regular forces, and therefore there's no mobilization, no problem with personnel, Mr. Putin would say. But we don't think conditions are brilliant in the Wagner group. They're not massively well supported. They are an extension of the Russian general armed forces. However, when things go bendy, they don't seem to be very well supported, looked after in terms of medical supply, equipment, and so on and so forth. So this footage, allegedly of Prigozhin trying to recruit to Wagner, is a very interesting development in terms of him and his association with the Wagner group. But it also comes, I would direct you to today's post from the Institute for the Study of War, US-based think tank, that is suggesting that Prigozhin is, and in their words, he's becoming established as the face of Russia's special military operation, unquote. Now, I don't think anybody would want to be the face of this operation. I mean, God, if ever there was you're being asked to stick your head in the mangle, hand, or whatever it is, hand in the mangle, head in the lion's jaw. I mean, you're setting yourself up for failure, or possibly he's been made an offer he couldn't refuse. But they are suggesting that Prigozhin had a meeting recently with a prominent military blogger, Maxim Fomin, who is a sort of ultra-nationalist, one of these bloggers we've been speaking about recently, who are so pro-Russia and so in favour of the war in Ukraine that they are outraged and incensed at the failure of the Russian army to win. And in particular, they were disgusted at Russia's performance last weekend and the rout from the Ukrainian army. And this military blogger community is very vocal, and although not hugely numerous, we think they 15-20% of the Russian population sort of read this stuff, believe this stuff, listen to these people. I mean, that's still quite a sizable minority, and they're becoming a bit of a pain for Putin. And so the ISW is suggesting that Prigozhin has been cajoled or been invited to act as a bit of a go-between between this the military blogger community and the Kremlin. The Kremlin needs it needs to keep them on side. It needs to win them back, because a lot of them are very anti-Kremlin and anti the direction of the war. There's also a suggestion from the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, that this role of Prigozhin, this sort of go-between, this link to the ultra-nationalists, is also a way of raising his profile. And they question whether or not Sergei Shoigu, the defense minister, is being sidelined and Prigozhin is being given a greater role and possibly, potentially in the future, taking over from him as the defense minister. So there's a lot of speculation there, a lot of what-ifery based on a few pieces of information that we think are authentic, but all very interesting stuff, and it does speak to a lot of the themes that we've been talking of lately about the right-wing blogging community and the lack of Russia to get ahead of the narrative, to try and sort of put anything convincing into the public sphere that would account for this great this devastating defeat last weekend. So interesting to see Prigozhin come to the fore now. Interesting to see footage of him openly linking himself to the Wagner group, something he's always denied. I mean, it makes no real difference if he's always denied it. There's been a lot of suggestions anyway. But yeah, just seemingly some moves here to try and shore up that kind of right-wing element of the Russian society that are in support of this war, but increasingly anti the Kremlin's management of it.
Thank you very much, Dom. Natalia, just before we go to Samarkand and what you're doing there, do you want to add anything to that?
Sure, yes, I'm totally with Dom on the Wagner video. It's quite extraordinary, especially given the fact that Prigozhin has for years denied any links to Wagner, the private military contractor that we know he founded and he has been funding. So it's quite extraordinary for him to say it that's his company, and it's quite mind-boggling that obviously Russia's manpower shortage is so big that he would personally tour prison colonies to get recruits. So yeah, that tells you a lot about where the war is heading at this point.
Well, Natalia, you are in Uzbekistan. Let's jump straight into that. Why are you there, and what have you seen so far?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, I'm not in Ukraine, but this is also a place where Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and Xi Jinping are meeting this weekend in something which is quite an important meeting for Vladimir Putin, while the Russian army has been sustaining heavy losses, and he's meeting one of the few world leaders who don't mind shaking his hands and doing a photo op with him, while he has essentially become an international player because of his invasion of Ukraine. For Xi, this is also the first foreign visit since the COVID pandemic. This is the first time he has literally ventured out of the country. And it's quite symbolic that they're meeting in Samarkand, which is an ancient city on the Silk Route in Uzbekistan and Central Asia. Parts of which, I would say the largest parts of Central Asia used to be part of the Soviet Union just 30 years ago. And in recent years, parts of Central Asia have seen major Chinese investment. And China has been anxious to expand into Central Asia, which is where Russia and China's interests might overlap and might collide as well.
Before we talk about Putin and Xi's relationship, their personal relationship, could you just give us a sense of the atmosphere at the moment in Samarkand? What's it like for you there as a reporter?
Yeah, this is actually quite extraordinary. I have covered many summits and high-level meetings in my career, including, I've just realized that almost exactly a year ago, I was in Geneva in Switzerland for the Putin-Biden summit. And obviously, you can imagine that security measures were quite tight for the president of the United States and the president of Russia. Yet there's nothing, what I've seen in Samarkand so far is nothing comparable to that. The city is basically on a security lockdown. Schools have been shut down, as well as public offices. Private cars are not allowed on the roads. This is quite a big city, which is typically bursting with life and activity. And now it feels a little bit like a zombie apocalypse because there are basically no people. Locals are nowhere to be seen. There are not any tourists. There are lots and lots of security officers, police officers, snipers. If you were to take a walk, as I did this morning, around central Samarkand to one of the main sites, you would literally see a policeman standing apart 100 meters of each other. staring at you as you walk by. They wouldn't stop you. They didn't even check my documents, even though I had my press badge. But you can, I mean, it's this is definitely unprecedented security measures, and the organizers have been quite cautious commenting on it. The official line is that these are the rules and regulations imposed by the entire Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Although some of the measures suggest that there might be that some of those measures have been encouraged or directly implemented by the Chinese, including obligatory COVID testing, which is something I haven't done for years. We know that I would say most of the world, if we don't talk about the population of China, has been living pretty much normal lives, and COVID has sort of become a thing of the past. And here, as soon as I arrived into my hotel, I had to do COVID tests, and the Chinese delegations and journalists all wear masks. So this looks like a throwback to 2020. And also, just final thing, really astounding security presence and I would say possibly quite intrusive presence by the Uzbek authorities who have assigned a minder to every member of the press. That means that you don't really get much time on your own. You get wined and dined and offered to do things. And as it is, I mean, I'm looking back at the Biden summit or at the G7 or G8 summits that I have been in the past. Journalists more or less are allowed to mingle with the delegations, if not with the leaders of the states as such. But yes, you sometimes there's a press center somewhere on the fringes of the venue of the actual meeting room, but you're not that far away. Here we're sitting in a tent about 1-2 kilometers away from the venue. There is a giant screen on which they're going to broadcast the meeting between Xi and Putin, which is about to start. But there's no way we're going to get anywhere near. And this morning, the word came out that we probably were not even going to allow it into the press center over here, like 2 kilometers away. So yeah, this is that's quite extraordinary.
Well, President Putin and President Xi last saw each other a few weeks before the invasion of Ukraine. Could you just sketch for us what happened there and how the relationship between China and Russia might have changed during the last 6 months, and end up talking a little bit about what Putin's trying to get from this summit?
I know that a lot of people are looking back at that meeting as Putin's possible attempt to, if not brief Xi about his ultimate intentions in Ukraine, but at least to test the waters and see what he would think if Russia was to launch that invasion. At that meeting, the Chinese and the Russians famously pledged a friendship with no limits, as they described it. And there was a lot of expectations among the Russian establishment and the Russian population that the Chinese are going to come to Russia's rescue in the face of international sanctions, while the rest of the world has been shutting down to Russia, canceling flights, cutting off business ties, canceling Russian business cards. But we saw very soon after the start of the war that the Chinese were not going to help out Russia at their own expense. Chinese banks have been extremely careful dealing with their Russian counterparts. There's a clear understanding that there's no way that China would even consider selling arms to Russia, as the West has done for Ukraine. They have been cautious not to condemn Russia for the invasion, nor have they cheered it. What they did, they just used the invasion and the whole crisis as a chance to blame the West for punishing Russia with sanctions, for seeking to impose a world order on their terms. But they have been very careful about dealing with the Russian state and with Russian state companies. And now, almost 7 months into the invasion, there's a clear understanding that there are very few deliverables that Putin might get from this meeting. We're not talking about there's no military aid to speak of, obviously. In terms of in terms of business deals, they could be something very limited. You might think that China might be a new market for Russian energy, which it could. But if you talk about oil, for example, it's not that easy for Russia to ditch Europe suddenly and start selling all its oil to China, simply because there are no pipelines. I mean, there's one recent pipeline, but the capacity is very limited. Even if Russia wanted to sell more energy and boost those energy supplies significantly, right now in 2022, there's just no capacity for it. And Russia has been selling oil and gas to China at a discount as it is, because it has been suffering those problems on the European markets.
So you mentioned there's only a few deliverables Putin might get from this. What might they be?
Well, at this point, obviously, when as Dom has painted a very good this picture of a desperation among Russian nationalists, among the Russian military, when we see Russia losing lands in Ukraine. So at this point, I think he would be grateful for any strong backing, even in terms of rhetoric. Even if China was to say that it supports Russia in standing up for its national interests, for its sovereignty, the way Putin has described. What we have seen in the past, those high-level meetings between Putin and Xi, leaders of China, they don't typically announce business deals as such. They might be talking about boosting energy supplies, but that would mean investing in infrastructure. So it's quite likely that they will pledge deeper cooperation on the energy sector, but this is something that's not going to change overnight, and we're not going to see things change this year or this month. It takes a lot of investment and time to build those pipelines, for example, to build infrastructure.
Something that Dom has spoken about quite a few times is how the Russian invasion of Ukraine, rather than dividing the West, actually united it. And we see Finland and Sweden joining NATO. In your article, you write that the disastrous war in Ukraine, which has cost thousands of lives, ruined international reputation, etc., risks turning Russia into China's junior partner in Central Asia. And I wonder whether that's almost the flip side of in the West, Russia's lost influence and has united the West. In the East, it's lost influence to China, and as you write, could become the junior partner. Is that a fair assessment, or do those things link together, do you think?
I would say it's quite a distinctive possibility, because before the war, Russia used to juggle between different partners. One day they would speak to Chinese, next day they would try to pit Europe against the US, or if not necessarily the EU, but several European nations like Italy or Greece, who have traditionally been quite friendly to Russia. And that has changed entirely. And in terms of strategic allies, major economies, there's just not much for Russia to rely on. Japan has turned against Russia. The EU, the US, that only leave China, and that leaves Russia very little room for leeway, very little room for negotiating. If I go back to the issue of energy and oil and gas, we're not in a situation where Putin could play Europe against China and say, if we don't sell this gas to Europe, we can sell it in China, and the other way around. There's just he really is left with very little leverage. Because if we look at countries like India or other developing economies, the size of their economies are just they just pale in comparison with that of Europe and the US. So it really leaves Russia with China.
Dom is chafing at the bit to ask a few questions, I think. So please, Tom Nichols.
Always chafing. Natalia, hi, great to speak to you again. I'm so glad to hear you out there. Could you take us, please, a quick whistle-stop tour around Central Asia? I know there's a big ask in a short time, but Putin, part of this war is about the grandeurs of former Soviet glory, blah, 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 blah. And you make the point in your article today that Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan have are more indebted to China than perhaps Uzbekistan and maybe others. And we spoke recently about the position of Kazakhstan that might possibly be trying to just put a little bit of a distance between itself and Moscow. But equally, the last few days there's been a flare up in Armenia and Azerbaijan. So just the near abroad, the former Soviet states in Central Asia that Putin would like to see as his backyard. They don't seem to be playing ball. And if they're they seem to be leaning away from Russia, or bar kind of Armenia really, and actively towards China. So I just wonder if you could give us paint a little picture there, please.
Yeah, great question, Tom. Yeah, with Kazakhstan, just a couple of months ago, Putin was hosting what used to be called the Russian International Economic Forum, which has gone quite national in terms of how difficult it has been for Russia to invite any foreign dignitaries to that. The president of Kazakhstan was the keynote speaker. He was the probably most prominent speaker on that panel, and he made quite extraordinary remarks at that meeting when he was asked by the moderator of the panel session about Kazakhstan's position on the invasion of Ukraine. And right there, staring at Putin, he said that Kazakhstan does not support the war. It doesn't support the invasion, nor does it recognize the annexation of Crimea, and it stands by Ukraine's sovereignty, which shows how little leverage Russia has in those countries now since it started the war. Obviously, that was quite an extraordinary moment and extraordinary words coming from Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, the president of Kazakhstan, whose very rule was in danger just in January when he faced violent riots. And just in a matter of days, those riots stopped when a Russia-led security alliance sent troops to Kazakhstan. So one might say that it was actually Putin who saved Tokayev's political career by sending those troops, but apparently it doesn't matter anymore. Kazakhstan, just like Uzbekistan, has been reaching out to China and to other countries and tried to be very careful in choosing its allies and trying not to put all eggs in one basket, as I might say. In terms of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, as you have mentioned, which have smaller economies and poorer populations compared to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, they have been strongly involved in China's Belt and Road initiative, which has resulted in very high levels of debt, which is a phenomenon we have seen across the developing world, especially in Sri Lanka. And for a country like Uzbekistan, which was quite an isolated regime under the dictator Islam Karimov just until 6 years ago, Uzbekistan has used it as a cautionary tale because they saw how dependent those two countries have become on Chinese investment, and that debt repayments are beckoning. So Uzbekistan is on a crossroads right now because clearly the sort of life-changing landmark projects in Russia are off the table right now because Russia has become toxic. But they have also been quite careful here about relying too much on China because they see what it could mean in terms of debt levels and over-reliance on one country.
And just if I may, just to follow up on that, so this speaks of a little bit, if not turmoil, but then just a little bit of a bit of an unsettled environment in Central Asia, and we know that China loves stability and likes order. So how are these kind of conversations and these slightly shifting positions viewed by China, do you think? Bearing in mind China is responsible for a lot of it with Belt and Road and the infrastructure projects, but generally the knock-on implications of some of these investments into the security sphere. How is that viewed, do you think, from China?
China is quite worried about Russia's position in Central Asia now. As you might know, Central Asia borders on Afghanistan, and this is the place where Russia has hosted. Russia has has had several military-based bases throughout the years. And obviously, we're in a time when Russia is running low on manpower. And we've been hearing voices about a potential scale down of Russian military presence in those countries. And throughout the years, China has been okay with Russia providing security in that region, being the security guarantor. China didn't have much interest in building military bases in that region. So one thing that Xi would be looking at the meeting with Putin today is his assurances that Putin wouldn't pack up all of the troops here and send them to the Ukrainian fronts, because they have been relying on Russia to, in a way, to maintain law and order here, just like they did in Kazakhstan in January. When they needed troops to send in to quell that armed uprising, they did. And right now, in the middle of the Ukrainian war, would they have that capability? Would they want to use it? It's a question we've all been asking.
Just a question from me, Natalia. You spoke earlier about what a win for Putin might look like in this meeting, and you said there aren't that many deliverables, but strong rhetorical support that would be appreciated. What, just for our listeners following the meeting or seeing it in their news apps and newspapers, what would failure look like?
I would say that there's an expectation that, at least on a rhetorical level, Xi would take an extra mile and criticize Western leadership or recent steps, or maybe try to defend Putin against accusation of nuclear blackmail. I think the failure, if you look at different public statements by the Chinese leadership, they're all very calm, devoid of any emotion, and it's really, you can see that they are very afraid of putting their foot wrong every time. So I think the failure would look like if Xi made it look as if nothing changed, as if things are normal, as if Russia doesn't need extra support or extra, kind word on his behalf. And if he made it sound as if it was business as usual, as if Russia did not face an existential crisis, because it does face an existential crisis right now with the way the war in Ukraine is going. Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Is there anything else we haven't spoken about, Natalia, that you think could be interesting for our listeners to hear?
Yeah, I think it's just worth mentioning that it's not just Putin and Xi who are meeting today. They're meeting on the sidelines of this major summit, which has been described as the Strong Men Leaders Summit. So we're also seeing the presidents of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, meeting Putin tomorrow. And this is another meeting I would look out for, as Erdogan has been quite active in trying to mediate between Vladimir Zelensky and Vladimir Putin to try to bring a ceasefire or mediate a grain deal for Ukrainian grain exports, as he has. And we heard earlier this week from Turkish diplomats that Erdogan might try to ask Putin to offer to host direct talks between him and Zelensky. So far, Kremlin has denied this possibility. They said it makes no sense to come and sit and talk with them, but it looks like Erdogan is going to try and get Putin to talk to Zelensky again.
Well, thank you very much, Natalia Vassilieva. Dom, are there any more updates we should talk about, or shall we go to our final thoughts?
As a final thought, I would just ask us to keep an eye on Armenia, Azerbaijan. As we said, this violence flared up the other night. And I'd be really keen to hear over the next few days, Natalia, what the mood music is there about this idea that perhaps, so Russia that backs Armenia, Russia potentially seen as weak, and maybe that's the reason Azerbaijan decided on, Monday night to start shelling Armenia, but maybe taking advantage of Russia's relative weakness in terms of security right now, and the inability to sort of take on another problem. So I'll be keen to hear your thoughts on that over the next few days. But we are told, we hear that under CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, which Russia would have us like to think as their kind of equivalent of NATO, so it's Russia, Armenia, and a load of the Stans. It's effectively sort of 98% Russia, regardless of what the uniforms are, but it's Russia. Armenia has invoked their Article 4, which is the equivalent of NATO's Article 5, as in it's the mutual defence clause. And interestingly, Russia says it's going to provide observer missions, but not any military aid to Armenia. So whether or not that speaks of Russia's inability to provide military aid, as in a formation, a brigade or what have you, or send any equipment, we don't know. But it is interesting that historically Russia-backed Armenia has asked for military support, and they're getting an observer mission. So we need to keep our eye on that and see if Azerbaijan develops that, or any further thoughts on Russia's inability to export security, given they're in the mire, in the mud in Ukraine. So that'd be my final thought, and I'd be really keen over the next few days to hear any fallout from that, from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit.
Would you like to add anything to that, Natalia?
Yeah, I'm totally with Dom on the Armenia-Azerbaijan question. In fact, I have heard Azerbaijani and Armenian contacts for months telling me that they were afraid of a flare-up just at the time when, as they put it, it wasn't about to weaken Russia. It was about the fact that Russia's attention was elsewhere, that the Kremlin had no time or attention for anything other than Ukraine. And this is what we saw. The clashes went largely unnoticed by Kremlin, and there's obviously we can see that there's very little willingness on Moscow's part to do anything. So yeah, this is something I would look out for in the coming weeks.
And Natalia, can I just get your final thoughts from Samarkand in Uzbekistan? What should our listeners be thinking of when they look at this summit over the next few days?
Yeah, I'm going to start from today, from the Xi Putin meeting. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about a unified anti-Western front with Russia and China against the West. Russia obviously is in a very weak position right now. It doesn't really have much to offer in terms of economy or the military power as such. Would be interesting to see if Xi were to at least verbally commit to any major energy project, or if he was willing to give Putin a hand in dealing with all of the surplus of oil and gas that Russia is going to have in the next years. And yes, I would definitely look out for the meeting between the president of Turkey and Russia tomorrow as a possible chance for peace and truce, as we have mentioned that President Erdogan is trying to mediate between Russia and Turkey and Ukraine.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph. To stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get your first 30 days completely free at telegraph.co.uk/audio. And sign up to Dispatches, our Ukraine newsletter, which brings stories from our award-winning foreign correspondents straight to your inbox. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app. And if you have a moment, leave a review, as it helps others find the show. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing podcasts@telegraph.co.uk. We do read every message, and we are especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine the Latest is produced by Louisa Wells and Giles Gear.